Hey everybody, I thought we would do something kind of neat tonight. I put out a lot of videos on different cultures and what have you over time, and I've shown you so far a process of creation that's been repeated many times over all these various cultures. The commonality that we see, at least that I'm finding in just about every single story, is that we start with a black hole. All these ancients, they all knew about black holes. And the fact is, if science, modern physical science research, or physics research would actually study the ancients and study the mysteries, they would realize that black holes are a lot different than what they think. The ancients knew about them a long time ago. So what I thought we would do is take a look at how the ancients kind of saw things. See, when they saw the universe, and when I say universe, I don't mean the entire universe of all existences and everything. What I mean is the area that we live in. It's our universe. It's our world. And our world consists of more than just our solar system, but it also consists of what they call the fiery heavens. Now, they understood this to be basically a macrocosm of man himself. So a good way to think about this are Russian dolls. You have Russian dolls, you put Russian dolls inside the other Russian dolls, and you kind of get down to the smaller and smaller until you get down to the really tiny ones. It's kind of like this. You have like a bunch of miniature archetypes, which we call humans, that exist inside a larger archetype. And there always is a description of what occurs at the very beginning. So we're going to take a look at cross-culture, we're going to take a look at the Bible. We're not going to look at every culture, but we're going to look at enough of them so that you can see the same story is being told in every one of them, and the same areas being pointed to. So let's take a look here. The symbolism that you're looking at right here, if you take a look over on the left there, you're looking at the tree of life again. The reason this tree of life thing is so important is because it shows us a makeup of man in both the macrocosm and the microcosm. So at the very top there, you see where the wings are. That represents the area of what we call Kether, and that refers to the pineal gland. The ones that are just below it represent the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Down there where you see the heart, and if you notice his little staff, that little yellow staff to the left there, notice how all these things are lined up. This is the wisdom they were trying to show us a long time ago. So when we think of this on a macrocosmic level, we need to think about it from what happens at the very beginning. And what happens at the very beginning, take a look at Buddha over here on the right. Look at his forehead. His forehead is showing us a spiral. And look at his heart area. It's showing us a swastika. Now the spiral, which represents his head, or the pineal gland of his head, cosmically refers to or corresponds to what we call a black hole, except for the definition of what we have defined black hole is incorrect. Black holes actually create things. We're going to see that when we take a look at the descriptions of what the ancients were telling us a long time ago. So try to understand the universe, our universe, the one that we exist within, is actually a larger man. And he has a beginning, and he has these areas of his body that correspond to different energy centers in the body all the way down to root. Right down here where we see the pelvis. And this represents the area of earth where we are. It's in the physical plane. So, with that understood, what we want to do is we want to take a look at what happened at the very beginning. Now, we've already got a good sign here from this symbol of Buddha. Okay? There's a reason why they put this on his forehead and why they put this on his chest, and it doesn't have anything to do with just pineal gland powers and the power of the heart. It's an understanding of the structure of the way the universe is on a macrocosm level and a microcosm level. This is what they're showing us all over the place. If you know the Eye of Osiris, you always see the Eye of Osiris as an eye with a swirl inside of it. All the symbolism is really important because it tells us really what's going on. So let's begin to take a look. And we're going to hop around and we're going to take a look at some different cultures and show you what's actually occurring. Show you the same characters. Now I just showed you the tree of life, so this will come into play. 4 Kabbalistic trees described, and this is, by the way, this is a Secret Teaching of All Ages, Manly Hall. The 4 Kabbalistic trees described in the preceding chapter were combined later by Jewish scholars into one all-inclusive diagram and termed by them not only the Sephirothic, but also the archetypal or heavenly Adam. According to some authorities, it is the heavenly Adam and not a terrestrial man whose creation is described in the opening chapters of Genesis. Out of the substances of this divine man, the universe was formed. So this heavenly Adam, and from his substances, the universe was formed. Universe meaning our universe that we play in right now. Our world. Intimate remains will continue even after dissolution shall resolve the spheres back into their own primitive substance. The deed is never considered of actually contained in the Sephiroth, which are purely hypothetical vessels employed to define the limits of creative essence. So the structure that it's showing us in Kabbalah is what we see right here. The first thing that we have is Kether. It's called Prima Mobile, and it's called the fiery heavens. If you think of the very beginning of creation, I mean, our sun just didn't appear out of the infinite. It was created somewhere. It was created by an area that creates stars. This is what the fiery heaven is. It's Prima Mobile. It's Kether, the crown, and it refers to that area which is associated to the black hole, which actually creates the stars, creates the matter. And then we have these other ones that represents the various areas from the zodiac, which to some sources represents one side of the brain, and then we have Saturn represents the other side. The whole deal with this whole Saturn hate stuff, I have no idea what all that is, but Saturn represents understanding, and it represents kind of a balance that you come to finally. If you take a look at any of the old alchemical art or diagrams from the famous Kabbalists and these guys and stuff like this, Saturn was the very last planet. Think of the human body, okay? You're moving up the human body. It's the very last planet you come to until you cross into the area of the head or the skull, okay? So that's what Saturn represents. So it's everything all the way up to the door, which is the door to the tent, which we've seen before. I'm not going to go through all these other ones because we're really going to talk about the black hole and all this stuff. So we see that the Sephirothic trait is sometimes depicted as a human body, like I showed you, and thus more definitely establishing the true identity of the first or heavenly man, Adam Kadmon, the idea of the universe. And what we see here is that he is the firstborn, and according to the following arrangement, Kether is the crown of the prototypic head. So that very fiery heavens I showed you up there, Kether is the crown of the prototypic head and refers to the pineal gland. So the fiery heavens, the prima mobile, refers to the pineal gland of the body of this very large person, the black hole area. It refers to the pineal gland as the firstborn of consciousness. And it says, Chokmah and Bina are the right and left hemispheres of the great brain. Flipping over to the Gospel of Thomas, this is an interesting one here. Jesus said, if they say to you, where have you come from? Say to them, we've come from the light, from the place where the light came into being by itself and established itself and appeared in their image. If they say to you, is it you? Say, we are its children, and we are the chosen of the living Father. So what this light that established itself, this is speaking of the pillar, this is speaking of the black hole that appeared in the very beginning. This is actually the word that we will see as we continue on. In the Gospel of the Egyptians, we see this. Then there came forth from that place the cloud of the great light, the living power, the mother of the holy incorruptible ones, the great power, the Merotho, and she gave birth to him, whose name I name, saying 3 times. And then it says, for this one Adamus, Adam, is a light which radiated from the light. He is the eye of the light. This is the pineal gland area. This is the black hole that first comes into being. For this is the first man, he through whom and to whom everything came into being. And we take a look back over here, we see that it is this heavenly Adam and not a terrestrial man whose creation is described. Out of the substance of this divine man, the universe was formed. Okay? For this is the first man, he through whom and to whom everything came into being. Okay, now let's hop over to the Bible. This is called the first begotten. So, we see here the first begotten up here at the top. And the first begotten, Philo, you're familiar with Philo and Plato and all these guys a long time ago, they apply the word to the Logos as the archetypal and governing idea of creation. Similarly, Christ as the firstborn of all creation. Black hole again. The eye and the light. And you could see the comparison between Christ and Adam. Because Adam is the first one created by the Word at the very beginning. So let's take a look at this particular verse. And it says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Christ, in the New Living Translation, is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before everything and was created and is supreme over all creation. Okay? For in him all things were created. Things in heaven, on earth, same thing as Adam that we see right here in both the Gospel of the Egyptians and also in the Adam Kadmon from Kabbalah. So we have a tie here. We have a tie to Christ. We have a tie to Adam. And so he is the firstborn of the infinite, the visible creation, the first visible creation, which is a projection of the invisible God. So it is an archetype existing in creation, the very first thing to come out of creation, that is a representation of the invisible deity, the unknown Father, which represents the supreme universal mind. Now, I've got this right here queued up. Let's listen to a little bit of the creation beginning as explained as by Osiris. Remember, Osiris is Orion. We're going to also see this in another culture as well. But listen to the way things begin here.
Osiris was first. Osiris Ka. Ka was the light of the mind and the light of the world. But it was more than intellect. It was the light which enlightened intellect.
The light that enlightened intellect. Intellect represents the brain, and these are archetypes and symbols.
Osiris Ka was a potter. He was a great artificer, and he fashioned all things on a potter's wheel.
Black hole.
The Nome of Memphis. Osiris Ka fashioned first the great age of the world, on which sprang forth both gods and men. Osiris Ka was also the architect, the base and substance of those archetypal designs which are to be everywhere manifested in creation.
So Osiris Ta, the architect, the potter that fashioned everything upon a potter's wheel, is describing a black hole. It's describing the first thing. It's describing the Word. Now let's listen to what it has here regarding the vision of Hermes. Let's listen to what it has to say.
beheld filling the universe, filling space, a strange monster. This monster was a great winged dragon, which writhed and turned and twisted in the air. In the vision, this dragon becomes the personification of universal mind, the intellect of the world. Hermes, however, fearful of the tremendous impact of this mind in the form of the great dragon, beseeches reason to present itself to him in some more familiar. There arose out of this mist and this darkness, now ascending from below, a great column, a pillar.
Black hole.
And this pillar became a great radiant thing standing in the midst of the mist. The universal mind began to devise out of itself the devisements of itself. It began to project its own eternal reason into the products of reason, fashioning out of itself many patterns as though upon a potter's wheel.
As though upon a potter's wheel, just like Osiris Ta, is the same thing describing a black hole once again. Now this is from John 1:1. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Well, what is the Word? Well, let's take a look. We're taking a look at the beginning here. "Then out of the imprisoned light a mysterious and holy Word came forth and took its stand upon the smoking waters. This Word is the voice of the light, rose out of the darkness as a great pillar." This is the vision of Hermes. "And the fire and the air followed after it. But the earth and water remained unmoved below." Thus the waters of the light were divided from the waters of the darkness. Sound familiar? Sound a little bit like the Bible? "And were formed the worlds above from the waters of darkness, formed the worlds below. The earth and the water next mingled, becoming inseparable. And the spiritual word, which was called reason, moved upon their surface, causing endless turmoil." This is further down in the vision of Hermes. "Before the visible universe was formed, its mold was cast." This mold is called the archetype. And this archetype was in the supreme mind long before the process of creation began. Beholding the archetypes, the supreme mind became enamored with its own thought. So taking the Word as a mighty hammer, it gouged out caverns in primordial space, and cast the form of the spheres in the archetypal mold. So it gouged out caverns in primordial space. It created black hole. And then the first thing that it created was an archetype. And the spheres, the archetype that it created was what was existing in the mind before the pillar arose. Okay, and then as the pillar arose and it started fashioning all these spheres and stuff out of it, it fashioned them in an archetypal mold. Now, this is something we also see across culture, but we're not going to get into that right now. "Then again was heard the voice of Poandrus, but his form was not revealed. I, thy God, am the light and mind, which before substance, which is divided from spirit and darkness, from light. And the Word," which was that hammer, "which appeared as a pillar of flame," there's our pillar, our black hole again, "out of the darkness, is the Son of God, born out of the mystery of mind." And this also agrees with the first begotten, which is the firstborn out of all creation, in which everything is created through it. It is a black hole. It creates the cosmos. This is what it's being referred to here. Just like I showed you in the Colossians 1:15 and 1:16. All things have been created through him and onto him. This is the Son of God, the firstborn out of the infinite. There's a double meaning to all of this too, though, as well. When you think about this stuff, you have to think about yourself as well. The firstborn of consciousness, that's the pillar. The next born is the next archetype that comes up, that's intellect. Okay? So, and then we have this creation that begins all the way down. But the firstborn of consciousness, as we have, is the pineal gland, and that's the reason why we see it that way on the tree of life. Now, this is really interesting that I think some of you guys will like. This is also the vision of Hermes, but I wanted to read this one part. The name Hermes is derived from Herm, a form of Chirum, personified universal life principle generally represented by fire. The Scandinavians worshipped Hermes under the name of Odin, the Teutons as Wotan, and certain Oriental peoples as Buddha, or foe. There are two theories concerning his demise. The first declares that Hermes was translated like Enoch, without death, into the presence of God. Now, there's another thing about Enoch as well. And that is that Hermes was known to the Jews as Enoch. So you guys are familiar with the book of Enoch, right? You guys, if you study any religious texts, you guys are probably familiar with Apocryphal 1970. And he has a very interesting video I'm going to play you a little bit of right here. It's going to show you some more confirmations. Now remember, the Jews saw Hermes as Enoch, and we've already listened to the vision of Hermes, and Hermes was telling us about the big pillar, right? Okay, well here's the book of Enoch. Listen to what this guy has to say.
Years passed, and then it happened. I was reading the book of Enoch, and all of a sudden I realized that what I was reading could not be fiction. I was absolutely sure that what I was reading could not have been the ramblings of an overzealous pseudo-prophet. What I read over and over again. The more I read it, the more certain I became about my conclusion. What I was reading was a perfect description of a black hole. This account is taken from 1 Enoch chapter 1. And I came to an empty place, and I saw there neither a heaven above nor an earth below, but a chaotic and terrible place. And there I saw 7 stars of heaven bound together in it, like great mountains, and burning with fire. At that moment I said, For which sin are they bound, and for what reason were they cast in here? Then one of the holy angels, Uriel, who was with me, guiding me, spoke to me and said to me, Enoch, for what reason are you asking, and for what reason do you question and exhibit eagerness? These are among the stars of heaven which have transgressed the commandments of the Lord, and are bound in this place until the completion of 10 million years, according to the number of their sins. I then proceeded from that area to another place, which is even more terrible, and I saw a terrible thing, a great fire that was burning and flaming. The place had a cleavage that extended to the last sea, pouring out great pillars of fire. Neither its extent nor its magnitude could I see, nor was I able to estimate. At that moment I said, What a terrible opening is this place, and a pain to look.
Well, that's enough of that. So you can see that what's being described again is another pillar. Now, let's take a look at another place in the Bible real quick. There's 2 other places I want to show you. Okay, so this is from the vision of Ezekiel. And we see in King James, And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself. And a brightness was about it, and in the midst thereof the color of amber out of the midst of the fire. This is Daniel 7:9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days, which, by the way, is described in Jewish mysticism as this area, which represents the pineal gland of this macrocosmic man, this black hole area. And the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. The same wheels as described in Ezekiel. Now this is the same throne that we will see in Revelation 19:12. His eyes were a flame of fire, on his head were many crowns, had the name of written that no man knew but himself. And then we have Revelations 2:18. His eyes were like unto a flame of fire. See, this is all describing the same area. It's all describing the same black hole. Now let's take a look at the Mayan culture here. The 3 Maya hearthstones. So right here we have, in Maya cosmology, man's creation is part of the grand cycle of cosmic events. According to the Popol Vuh, the Quiche Maya epic, when the sky had not been raised from the time of creation, the 3 hearthstones were set. At the beginning of another cycle of human creation, the same 3 stones, Oxtun in Mayan, had to be placed first to renew the order after destruction. These 3 hearthstones are carried on the back of the turtle constellation of Orion. See the picture below from the Madrid Codex, the turtle hanging from the sky, and the triangle of the 3 stones, or cock glyph on its back. This triangle is the area of the Orion's M42 nebula, the triangle, which represents the trapezium of the Orion Nebula. The 3 hearthstones are not from Orion's belt, one of the most famous parts of the constellation as shown in the diagram below. They are formed by a triangle, with Alnitek, one of the stars from the belt, and the other 2 stars, Rigel and Siph. That's this one, and this one. And in the middle of that, within this triangle, M42 zone is one of the brightest nebula and most active region of star formation found closest to the Earth. For the Mayas, the 3 stars are the bright hearthstones holding the flame that they call the hazy nebula, the smoke from the hearth. Thus, the triangle of the 3 hearthstones is the very foundation of the traditional Maya home. This is not only the piece to cook the food, but also a center for households. Interestingly, the triangle, the tetrahedron in 3D, universally represents the element of fire and alchemy of life. So there we go. So we have the same story from the Mayans also. So as you can see, and here's your Buddha again, here's your Osiris right here. This is also the Eye of Providence, which many of you are familiar with. So we see the eye with the swirl inside the middle of it, which represents the pineal gland of this, as you can see right here on the Buddha, it's in the place of the pineal gland, and it sits inside of a triangle, which represents the area of the Orion Nebula, just like the Mayans showed us as well. And this is all over the place, and it all points to the same area. I've read this for you before, where it shows that that this glyph for Osiris is a meaning of a tent or dwelling or resting place, and the second has the meaning of eye placed inside the sign for tent. Of course, in the Bible we see I have set a place in the sky, or a tent. I've pitched a tent for the sun. The Son is the firstborn out of the infinite, the first begotten. Horus was also the firstborn out of the infinite. You can see Osiris represents the creator before the first physical creation. The pillar represents the firstborn, and we see it all over in all of these various cultures. Finally, there's one other thing I wanted to show you regarding the vision of Hermes, and that is the great creature answered that it was Pomandrus, the mind of the universe, the creative intelligence, the absolute emperor of all. Shur identifies Pomandrus as the god Osiris, and Osiris is Orion. So this represents the, not Orion being, don't think of it as an object, think of it as a point where the infinite, that's the reason it says, lo, Osiris has come as Orion. Osiris could come as anything, but what they were concerned with in the ancient Egyptian culture was that he had come as Orion, because they understood that this was the first beginning of the creation of man. And so what represents Adam, the first man, Christ, and the firstborn out of the infinite, Horus, all of these various things, the Son of God, it's the black hole that's talked about in all these various cultures, the first thing to come out of the infinite, and to fashion things upon a potter's wheel that we see in all of these various cultures. That everything that was created through it, this is the Son of God. And so the black hole, it sits in the very center of the trapezium, represents the firstborn out of the infinite. It represents the Son of God. And it represents, on the human body, when we think of it as a very large man, represents that first thing born out of consciousness. And it corresponds to the pineal gland. So I thought you guys would be interested in that comparative analysis real quick. Didn't go into too much detail, but you guys get the point that the ancients knew about black holes. Modern physical science would do well to study the mysteries and do some comparative analysis so that they can save themselves a little bit of time in understanding the way the universe works. You guys take care, and I'll talk to you soon.